Welcome to In Our Community. I'm your host Vidya Pradhan, and today it's my pleasure to introduce Bishop Mary Gray-Reeves. Bishop Mary became the first woman Episcopal diocesan bishop in California in 2007 when she was ordained the third bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of El Camino Real in Saratoga. She is also the author of Unearthing My Religion, a book that helps non-Christians explore faith and spiritual practice and trains Christians to speak clearly about the things that matter most. Her passion is for making the Christian faith relevant in today's complex world. A very warm welcome to you, Bishop Mary.
Thank you very much.
For those of our viewers who may not be familiar with it, could you give us a little bit of information about the Episcopal Church itself and what it stands for?
Sure. The Episcopal Church is often described as a small denomination, but historically very relevant in the United States. Our roots, though, are in England, and we're part of the English Reformation. We are a church that is in 16 countries as the Episcopal Church, and we are part of the worldwide Anglican Communion, which also expands in lots of places around the globe. We're about 70 million strong in the world. The American Church is about 2 million people, so we're actually kind of a small portion. But we are a church that is considered in our own context quite progressive, and certainly by the standards of the rest of the world quite progressive. And our denomination is one that is interested in what people think and having people fully engaged with their whole being in the conversation that is important in the world about who we are as a human community, justice, respecting the dignity of every human being. So we are organized regionally. A diocese is a region. My diocese extends from Palo Alto down to the bottom of San Luis Obispo County. And within that region are 43 congregations over which I have jurisdiction.
So there is a saying that the Episcopal Church is Protestant yet Catholic. What does that mean?
We have a very strong sacramental heritage, so you can look, especially in this country, at worship on a Sunday morning and often think it looks like the Catholic Church, and it does. We have very similar traditions. There are some key differences between the Catholic Church and the Episcopal Church. In that sense, the Protestant piece about sort of the priesthood of all believers, about valuing the scripture, those things come into play, and we have a different balance, if you will, between those two things.
In terms of rituals, though, it looks a lot like the Catholic
Yes,
Church.
In our own country especially, we value very much the Eucharist, which also our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters do as well.
I see. Now, you have the distinction of being the first woman bishop in California, and my understanding is that 1970s was the first time women were allowed in the priesthood.
Correct.
So this is a very progressive element of the church, in allowing women in leadership positions. So what in the church's tenets allows for this level of progressivism when several other Christian sects struggle with this dilemma? So what makes it possible?
Well, theology, the word theology is really what we think about God, and in turn what we think about ourselves and the relationship we have with God. Historically, the church has, in its ordained orders, has been mostly dominated by men. There are some strands way back in the early years of the church where women were much more visible in the what we would now call the ordained life of the church, but there was a long period there where that wasn't the case. And ecclesial life, church life, often mirrored civic life. It was very much a part of civic life in a way that in our country it's become quite disconnected now between religion and our state, for example, religion and spirituality. In our own church, we tend to take on things when we see there's probably an injustice. And even if it's been an important part of our heritage and our history, we actually say we perhaps need to rethink this. So the conversation around the presence of women in leadership was a long conversation. We have also had the conversation around gay and lesbian, transgender, bisexual people in our church, and have come to a place of full inclusion, not without its major debates.
Exactly. I mean, I'm sure that people who have been in the church for a while and have entrenched beliefs, it must be very hard for them to change those.
Yes.
How does that dialogue happen?
It's long. It takes years. It did for women as well as in our current debates around human sexuality. In our own case, we talk until we're done talking. We have a general convention, which is our governing body. It's a very democratic process. We gather every 3 years. So we move our values, if you will, through the process of resolutions. And we make church-wide meta-narrative statements in our church, but they're not always shared at the local level. Our church, though, I like to think of us as a gathering place, so we have both conservative and liberal people in all our churches. I say in our diocese we set a very broad table, and the only rule is respectful conversation.
And how do people within the church deal with dissent? How do they deal with not sharing the same values as their fellow churchgoer, considering it's an institution that really creates some kind of identity within itself? How do people manage with having different beliefs within that identity?
I think in our tradition, what we would like to say is that belief is not the only component of identity. That community, being the body of Christ, which means in our diversity we have a unity because Jesus Christ is our gathering place, if you will. So we honor and respect difference, and actually honor and respect the fact that you can get a lot of creativity out of conflict. So
that's true.
If you get people speaking in the room together, sometimes something even greater can emerge. I think in our own tradition, because we have a very strong intellectual ethos in our tradition, that civil discourse is something that's very important to us. I think it's something we've lost in our own country. And as a member of the religious community, I think we can actually, it's a place we can lead, is to say, I disagree with you, but let's talk about it. Here's what I think. Tell me what you think.
And I can live with you even if I disagree with you.
Absolutely. It's one of our gifts of our worldwide church because, for example, we have a partnership with a diocese in Africa, which lives and thinks very differently than we do here, but we have visits with one another. We really listen to each other. We've gotten to know each other, and we are all transformed by that experience.
So going back to the diversity of having women first in the priesthood, and then what do you think women bring to the office of leadership within the church? What do we bring to the table?
Well, we bring a different experience. In every culture, women have a different experience than men. I like to think, and I don't like to speak in gender stereotypes, but we are enculturated as women to be more collaborative. It's the way we survive, is that we have to negotiate with a male-dominated world. And I think that's probably true across all cultures, even in our very progressive country. And so I think we bring that skill, and it's actually a skill that helps us as a church. I mean, if we're going to uphold that value of civil conversation, for example, of being collaborative and being in creative, even conflicted discourse, the value of collaboration is a very important one.
Did you find that with the ordination of women, that the dialogues became a little easier, or were there more conflicts after women were ordained into the priesthood?
It depends on what the dialogue was about, I would say. And we still have there really is still a stained glass ceiling in our church in terms of the upper levels of leadership. For example, in the worldwide Anglican Communion, there's only about 35 women bishops out of about 800 bishops.
That brings me to my next question. In May 2011, you helped coordinate and host the first Beautiful Authority Conference. I think this speaks to that. Tell us about it.
Yeah, that was the reality is that for the women in the first generation of those who were ordained, they had a cause to gather around that they built community around. So you had a lot of really great collegial relationships, but they didn't translate down, if you will, to those of us who came later. So especially for young women, they get quite isolated because they're such a minority in a diocese. So it was something that some of my younger women clergy were coming to me and asking the same kinds of questions that women have always asked in the ordained ministry, like, what do I wear? How do I be feminine and occupy a role that is always historically viewed as male? How do I be pregnant and at the altar? Things like this they're very visceral realities, and they are questions that men don't ask. You know, they are specific to women. So I said, well, let's have a gathering. So we had a 3-day gathering, and with lots of support. It was kind of this grassroots effort, and I thought, oh, we'll sort of have registrations straggling in, but I mean, within about 4 weeks, there were 20 women signed up and a waiting list going. So the need was huge.
This conference?
This conference, we've now expanded. This first year, we're going to actually have one for women 50 and over. I still like to work with the younger ones because I think they are, you know, right on they're figuring out motherhood, priesthood, whether they want children. I mean, whatever, all these kinds of things you figure out in your 30s, you know. So the conference has 3 components: one of identity, one of navigating the ministry path. So what is my call about in terms of the church and the world? And then what's the work-life balance? Clergy are notorious overfunctioners. So, you know, what is the balance? You asked me, what do I like to do for fun? You know, it's a very important question to ask clergy because we can work all the time if we're not careful. Yeah.
Yes, because there is a need and you need to fulfill it.
Yeah, and it never ends. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about marriage equality. From our conversations earlier, my understanding is that actually the church came to this a lot earlier than maybe our government got to it in terms of marriage equality. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it was kind of really a wonderful experience for many of us, and again, not universally agreed upon because not everybody in our church agrees with this. But we had our general convention in late June, and our decision about changing language in some of our marriage liturgies happened about 4 days after the Supreme Court decision. So for many of us, it was a time of great thrill and excitement and emotional release that sort of we were doing, everything was moving so synergistically. So, and marriage equality has been, was the next kind of logical step after removing barriers to the ordination process and making statements in our church-wide organization that said that gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender persons are fully included in our church. So it was just a natural sort of progression to say, and we honor the partnering, the coupling, the marriages of these couples, same-sex couples.
How does that happen in the church?
So we have now a liturgy of same-sex blessing that is used, and we now, after December, we'll be able to use a marriage liturgy that is non-gender specific, so the joining of 2 persons. And those liturgies can be used throughout the church. There is a dissent clause, if you will, so for bishops who don't agree with this, they have to make arrangements for couples or for clergy who want to perform these marriages. But say in our own state, California has had same-sex marriage for a few years now, and I have allowed my clergy to do those blessings, to bless those marriages. The church has progressively come along to now actually say this is a marriage, not just a blessing of a relationship.
Is this harder in other places, say your sister churches in Africa?
Oh yes, in Africa they struggle mightily with our decisions, and it's very hard for them. The culture of marriage there is has many more implications in their social structure than it does for us. In the way that our country has evolved socially around the matter of marriage. And that has lots to do with the place of women in society, how women are supported and treated, and what it means to have children, and things that we just don't have the same understanding or perspective as they do. But it's been very important in our diocese to stay in that dialogue and really learn and understand what the differences are.
And your hope is that with the continuation of the dialogue, there'll be a closer meeting of minds? Well,
I don't think we agree, but we respect and we honor one another, and we really do understand one another's context. I know for us, after in 2003, we ordained our first openly partnered gay bishop. And that just caused a firestorm around the world. It was big media news, and not just for the church. But it had big implications for some places in Africa, because Christians would be then persecuted against. They didn't distinguish that it was just our denomination. For them, for Muslims, for example, or for indigenous tribal faiths, it was all Christians. So there were implications that were very broad and wide that it was very important for us to hear about.
So the church as a whole got tarred by that, by the perception.
Yes, correct.
But is it true that the schism in the church was actually more over the ordination of women than over the ordination of gay people?
I think we've had two. So if you can have two schisms, then we've had two. But I think it is about the, you know, at the bottom of that is something about the value of the feminine and the value of choice and the value of being able to name one's identity. And we have honored those things, and that is not a universally held value around the world. That there are other things that come first before those things. So I think we have.
So women have a more uphill task. In general?
It's hard to tell. I think it's a little too early to tell around the human sexuality piece. I think, though, in our church, we are on an edge. We're actually at a really great tipping point on women, I think, and we have an opportunity to do some strategic transformation and change. Systemic change, in any organization, any country, takes a very long time, and it must be extremely intentional. I think that one of our downfalls is that we have General Convention, we make these great decisions, but then we actually don't see them through in terms of the actual change of things that are required, especially when they're very difficult.
How does that kind of change happen from top down?
I don't think it happens top down. I think you can say this is what our value is and this is what we believe, but actually the relationship, one-to-one work happens at the local level. The same around race. I mean, we see it in our racial brokenness in our country, and our church is reflective of that. You know, we say this is really important and we value every human being, but we're still very segregated and we're still a predominantly white church. You know, so there's work to be done there as well.
And what is that way forward?
I do think it's about finding ways to do dialogue. I mean, I would say our partnership with this African diocese, which also includes an English diocese, so we have three pretty distinct cultures in this partnership, has been a great model about visiting, about really listening to one another's stories and coming to deeper understanding about each other. Because that is the way that we let go of our, you know, the prejudices that we learn without knowing we're learning them. In our culture, we have certain groups that are privileged. As a white person, I'm privileged in my culture, and I have that within me, and I don't even know I have it within me. So increasing my consciousness of that helps to change the future in terms of releasing biases that I have that I don't know I have, you know, becoming more aware of those.
And that brings me to my question, which is, what is the church's role in shaping and commenting on the challenges of the society it finds itself in?
Well, we've lost our voice a bit. You know, religion seems to be increasingly irrelevant, but I hope we can change that. It's been fun to watch the Pope speak to the Congress, and I thought, wow, what a great opportunity that he had to go in and say, you know, we need to care about the common good here. And we need to care about people, we need to care about the poor, we need to care about justice, and you need to think about these things. Climate change, I mean, all these things that in the church we talk about and we think about and care about. But we also, and we'd love to have more influence and create conversation. I think one thing I want to do in this diocese is, how do we help our local congregations become local places of community conversation, so that we do bring conflict into the room and we do learn again in this country how to have civil discourse. I think it's a lost art, and we could work at that.
Is it a challenge to attract younger people to the church? Is religion still relevant to their lives? Is it because it seems to have gotten lost a little bit?
Yes,
what does
definitely.
the church think about it? What do you think about it, and what can you do about it?
I think there's another dialogue opportunity there, an intergenerational one. And truly, technology, this place in which we live, Silicon Valley, is changing the way our brains work and our minds work, and especially for younger people, it is even more true. I don't think that because you're younger you don't care about spirituality. I don't find that at all. And young people are often tremendous theologians because they're thinking and trying to figure out the world and how they fit in it and what does the universe mean.
Maybe it's the organized part that
I think it's the institution part, way too much of it. And for those of us who've been at it for a while, we'd like to do things exactly the same way, and we're going to have to let go of some of that, for sure.
Any strategies that you're working on to bring in more younger people into the fold?
We are using cross-cultural skills to also have cross-generational skills, and again, that art of dialogue. Some churches are better at it than others, and again, they just have to make a conscientious effort. It's part of that long-term systemic change, especially in a church with a lot of history and tradition, which is very important, but at the same time, how do we make it meaningful for now?
Exactly. I mean, what is the role that the church plays in today's society? What do you think that is?
Well, I think we can be a place where we empower people's voices. I think that a lot of people don't. First of all, there's so much news. We read now an equivalent of 160 newspapers a day. In terms of information, it's very hard to make sense of all that. I don't think we can be an exclusive moral voice, but rather we can be a context for empowering people to make decisions about how they're going to live in this world. And
you do feel that guidance is necessary?
Yeah, I think guidance is necessary. I think your guidance to me is necessary, and mine to you is necessary. That community is very important. I think community is shaping differently now. It's online, it's in coffee shops, there's lots of different places we find it. It used to be church was the third rail. It was the one place, the other place you gathered, you know, besides work and home, and that's no longer true. I think as Christians we need to be more present in the world. We need to be more articulate about our faith experience and what difference it makes in our lives, and be willing to just share with difference and not worry about what the outcome is.
Now, your book, Unearthing My Religion, actually discusses the connection between spirituality and religion. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what your understanding is of the difference, the similarity, and its relevance to attracting, you know, more young people into the fold? Because I think young people are, as you said, exploring their spirituality even if they don't have the answers.
Yes, I think spirituality is a pure thing. You know, you don't have to believe in God to be spiritual. So we all have some kind of spiritual sense, and I would just frame that as being able to sense the unseen, so that which is intangible. So love, peace, joy, grace, these are words that they're not the table, you know. And so we all have a sense of that. And
something bigger than ourselves?
Something bigger, that could be something bigger than ourselves, or something within us, higher power, 12-step language. Religion has been the way to frame that, and there's value in every religion. Usually there's stories at the center of that which try to help people connect with the world and with each other, to build certain kinds of communities. Spirituality has always been couched in religion. It's actually connected historically to the Christian religion. For the first time in history, it is segregated off from that word. So people will say now, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. Yeah. What I am seeing a little bit more, I feel like we're kind of on the other side of hostility in the culture around religion. And I would say that on this West Coast, which is going to be more post-Christian than, say, the southeastern United States. That there's more curiosity about ritual and about mystery, and wanting to experience the spirituality that are in those things. So I think for us as church, one of the things we can do is to accent that, not actually changing the ritual, because the ritual is very powerful, but actually just letting it speak for itself, instead of trying to get people to believe certain things about it. Like the Eucharist, in our tradition, is very central. There's a lot of ways to look at the Eucharist. So one way to do it is just do the Eucharist and let people take it in and absorb it themselves and process it themselves.
Is it open to non-Christians?
In our church, you're meant to be baptized, but in the United States, because there's so much coming and going now between secular and religious worlds, that in this region, those barriers are pretty much down. So you can come into an Episcopal church, and by all means, please feel welcome to receive Eucharist. Yes.
Wonderful. Your book does talk about exploring spiritual practice. Can you give an example of that?
Well, like anything, the more you practice, the better you get at it. So I think if you want to feel the presence of something other than yourself, God, if you want to call it God, then to spend some time being conscious of the present moment is one way to experience that presence, and that's a spiritual practice. So to do that, even 5 minutes a day, may change your ability to feel peace, to stay calm, to keep your wits about you in a stressful situation.
That's great advice.
To stay centered and in the moment, because oftentimes we get so focused on the future or we're dwelling on the past, and we are not living in either one of those places.
A sense of mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
Absolutely. If I may ask a personal question, you lost your husband last year to a tragic bike accident.
I did.
My condolences.
Yeah, thank you.
When this happened, did you find your faith shaken in any way? Did you think, why me? Why did this have to happen? He was such a good person. Why did he have to go? These are the questions we ask when we lose someone unexpectedly.
Yeah, I did not ask that question. I had people say it around me, and in my mind I just thought, well, why not me? You know, terrible tragedies happen to all kinds of people every day. You know, I live a very blessed life, and we had a very blessed life. Michael and I were married 31 years. We have 2 great kids, and life was good, and it's an absolute tragedy. I wouldn't say it was a faith crisis. I would say that actually my consciousness of God became much deeper, and held on to the silence of God, if you will, to the mystery of God, because I felt like I was in a place of mystery in this world and in this life. Suddenly I was, you know, I was just in a place that was a foreign land. So, but as I rolled around in that and wandered around in that, I did not feel like I had been abandoned or that I was being punished, but that God was right there. As a Christian, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I believe in mine, and I believe that has some cosmic reality, and it also has implications for right now. So I held on to that, because that tells me that when something dies, something new can be born, and I feel like I'm in that process. I have no idea what that's going to look like, but it was such a comfort and a grounding thought for me as I moved through, you know, a long period of shock. In the case of a sudden and tragic death, people would ask me early on, because they were anxious about me and how I was, you know, are you getting grief counseling? I was like, well, when I believe it, actually, I'll go see a counselor, but it just took 4 months to believe that this was actually, you know, happening. So, and the grief process is long. So I'm still, widows have said to me, the second year is the worst, and I thought in the first year, there's no way it can get worse, but I can actually, the reality settles in, you know, in a different way. So
thank you for sharing something so intimate with us, and those are really wise words. If you had to say something, share something with our viewers, what would you like to finish on? We just are just about running out of time.
Well, I would say find community, and find community that feeds your soul. I think that not only are we living in an age where spirituality has become disconnected from its roots, which can be very good and powerful. Not all religion is good and powerful, but some of the roots are really deep and good. That we're also living in an age where we are the most individualistic culture in the world of all time, and I'm not sure it's such a good thing.
Thank you so much for being with us today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and it was wonderful listening to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for listening to us on In Our Community. This is your host, Vidya Pradhan, saying Namaste.
Namaste.